A businessman decides to investigate his own company upon noticing signs that don't make sense. Arriving undercover, he finds an environment marked by pressure and constant silence. But everything changes when he sees an employee being humiliated for trying to take care of her own son. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love touched you, subscribe to the channel. Tell us here in the comments which city you are watching from. We really want to know. And if you want to see more stories like this, don't forget to leave your like and share it with someone special. Roberto Aguiar always believed that numbers only tell half the story. At 52 years old, after 3 decades of building the Saboritia chain from scratch, he knew how to recognize when something wasn't right, even if the spreadsheets insisted otherwise. And on that Tuesday morning, while reviewing reports from the Campinas unit in the Cambuí neighborhood, the feeling of discomfort that had been growing for weeks finally took shape. That specific snack bar presented acceptable numbers. Not excellent, but within the expected average. The problem lay between the lines. Employees resigning without a clear justification, always with vague and hurried explanations. Internal evaluations that didn't match the customer comments on social media. Small inconsistencies in inventory reports that, in isolation, could be common errors, but together formed a disturbing pattern. Roberto closed his laptop and looked out the window of his office in the center of Campinas. The city stretched out busily under the morning sun, full of life and contradictions. He had started exactly like that, with a single snack bar in a simple neighborhood, serving honest sandwiches to hard-working people. Now, with 42 units spread across the interior of São Paulo, it would be easy to distance himself, trusting only in managers and reports. But Roberto hadn't built all of that by being the type of person who delegates problems without understanding their roots. He picked up the phone and called Claudia, his assistant for 15 years. She answered on the second ring, already accustomed to his direct pace. "I need you to cancel my schedule for today," he said without beating around the bush. "I'm going to do a field visit." Claudia didn't ask where to. She knew Roberto well enough to know that when he used that tone, any questioning would be useless. Half an hour later, Roberto parked his discreet car 2 blocks from the Cambuí unit. He was wearing jeans, a simple shirt, and a cap. Nothing that would draw attention. The idea was to observe without being recognized, to see what the numbers and official reports didn't show. He wanted to see how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. The eatery was on a busy corner, close to offices and colleges. It was lunchtime and the movement was intense. Roberto entered slowly, observing everything. The environment had the chain's visual identity, but something was wrong. The tables were clean, yes, but the atmosphere was heavy. The employees moved with excessive haste, not the haste of someone who is busy and satisfied, but the tension of someone who fears making a mistake. He sat at a table in the corner from where he could observe the entire dining room. The service took longer than it should have. When an attendant finally approached, she looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good afternoon, what would you like?" Her voice was mechanical, without warmth. Roberto placed his order, and she wrote it down quickly without eye contact before disappearing toward the kitchen. While he waited, Roberto observed. The manager, a man around 35 years old identified by a different shirt, circulated through the room with a rigid posture. Every time he passed near an employee, the person would shrink slightly, as if expecting a scolding. He didn't guide, he didn't teach. He only inspected with a critical gaze and a permanently dissatisfied expression. It was then that Roberto saw her. Marina. He didn't know her name yet, but the young woman's presence was impossible to ignore. Unlike the other employees who moved with tension, she worked with a natural, almost instinctive fluidity. She couldn't be more than 28 years old, with brown hair tied in a ponytail, and an impeccable uniform despite the intense rush. But it wasn't just her appearance that drew attention. It was the way she moved. Marina attended to 3 tables at the same time without appearing hurried. She solved problems before they grew, calmed impatient customers with the right words and a respectful tone, and helped overloaded colleagues without waiting for thanks. There was a maturity in her gestures, an awareness of the entire environment, as if she saw not only her own responsibilities, but the complete functioning of the floor. Roberto observed when a customer complained loudly about a wrong order. The manager approached with a defensive posture, ready to confront. Before the situation could escalate, Marina discreetly arrived at his side, lightly touched his arm, and took over the conversation. In less than 2 minutes, the customer was satisfied the problem was solved, and she went back to her tables as if nothing had happened. Interesting, Roberto thought. That girl didn't just work well, she sustained the functioning of the place. But then he noticed something strange. At regular intervals, Marina would absent herself for a few minutes. They weren't long breaks, maybe 3 or 4 minutes at most, but they happened with unusual frequency. She always waited for a moment when her tables were attended to, left everything organized, and disappeared through a side door that led to the back of the establishment. When she returned, she resumed work immediately with the same efficiency as before. Roberto furrowed his brow. There was something there that didn't fit. It didn't look like rest or talking with colleagues. It was something different, something she was trying to keep discreet. He decided to observe more closely. He changed tables, moving to an angle that allowed him to see the movement better. That was when he realized that Marina didn't just go to the back. She also checked her cell phone quickly, with a worried expression, before returning. Roberto's order arrived. He ate slowly, without rushing, keeping his attention divided between the food and his observation. The sandwich was good, within the standard he himself had established years ago, but the general service of the team was mechanical, cold, efficient only out of obligation. Except for Marina. She was different. Every customer she served left satisfied, not just with the food, but with the experience. She remembered preferences, made small gestures of attention, and transformed a rushed lunch into something minimally pleasant. Roberto observed her for almost 2 hours. He saw when she prevented a tray from falling, saving plates and the dignity of a new colleague. He saw when she discreetly reorganized the order queue in the kitchen, improving the flow without anyone noticing. He saw when she calmed a crying child, while the parents tried to eat in peace. And he also saw when the manager harshly reprimanded her for something trivial, in front of everyone. Marina lowered her head, apologized without raising her voice, and went back to work. But Roberto noticed the clenching of her jaw, the way her hands trembled slightly before she recomposed herself. That confirmed everything. The unit didn't have an operational problem. It had a leadership problem. But Marina remained a mystery. Why was someone so competent in a basic position? Why did she absent herself so frequently? And why, despite clearly suffering unfair pressure, did she continue working with such dedication? Roberto knew he could simply reveal his identity, fire the incompetent manager, and solve the administrative problem. But that wouldn't answer his questions about Marina. There was something bigger happening there, something he needed to understand before acting. He decided to return the next day. That night, in his quiet apartment in the Taquaral neighborhood, Roberto couldn't stop thinking about that young woman. There was something familiar in the way she worked, the same determination he had when he started, the same ability to see beyond the obvious, to solve problems without waiting for orders. He took his laptop and opened the unit's human resources files. He found her record easily. Marina Oliveira, 28 years old, had been working at the company for 3 years. No promotions, no warnings. Evaluations were always positive but generic, without specific recognition of her skills. 3 years of doing exceptional work, and no one had noticed. Or worse, they had noticed and ignored it. Roberto closed the laptop with more force than he intended. That wasn't right. People like Marina were rare. Not just good employees, but people who understood the business instinctively, who made a difference without needing a title or recognition. And someone was wasting that potential. The next day, Roberto returned to the snack bar. He arrived earlier before the lunch rush. He wanted to observe the start of the shift to see how things worked when the movement was still quiet. Marina was already there, organizing tables, checking material supplies, helping the kitchen team with small adjustments. She worked with the same seriousness as always, but Roberto noticed something different that day. She seemed more tense, checked her phone more frequently, and her quick absences were happening from early on. Something was different. Something was about to happen. Roberto sat at the same corner table, ordered a coffee and waited. He didn't know exactly what he was waiting for, but his intuition, honed by decades of experience, told him that today would not be an ordinary day. And he was right. Around 11 in the morning, when the movement began to increase, Marina made another one of her quick exits. This time she took a little longer. When she returned, Roberto noticed that her face was different, worried, almost desperate, although she tried to hide it. The manager also noticed. Roberto saw when he approached her with an irritated expression. "You're disappearing a lot today, Marina." His voice was loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Sorry, Fabio, it won't happen again." She tried to go back to work, but he grabbed her arm. "Wait a minute. I want to know what you're doing in the back. Every day it's the same thing. You think I don't notice?" Marina pulled her arm away delicately, trying to maintain her composure. "I just need to resolve something quickly. It doesn't interfere with my work." "It doesn't interfere?" The manager raised his voice even more. "You disappear 10 times a day and you think it doesn't interfere?" The snack bar began to go silent. Customers looked on. Employees stopped what they were doing. Marina kept her head down, but Roberto could see her hands trembling. "Please, Fabio, can we talk about this later?" "No, we're going to talk now, in front of everyone, since you think you can do whatever you want here." Roberto felt anger rising. That wasn't management. It was public humiliation, a gratuitous and cruel abuse of power. And then, the manager did something that changed everything. "Let's go. Show me what you're hiding so much in the back." He started walking toward the side door, and Marina had no choice but to follow him. Roberto also stood up, keeping his distance, but determined to see what would happen. What he saw in the back of the eatery, in a small adapted storage room, made his heart tighten in a way he didn't expect. There, sitting on a small chair with a sketchbook in his lap and children's headphones on, was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with big, startled eyes upon seeing the adults enter. Marina ran to him, instinctively protective. "It's okay, Lucas. Mommy will be right back." The manager looked at her with a mixture of shock and indignation. "You brought a child to work? Are you crazy?" Roberto remained at the door, observing. Finally, he understood. The constant absences, the worry, the tension. Marina was trying to balance the impossible, working and taking care of her son at the same time, because she clearly had no other option that day. "I had no one to leave him with today," Marina explained in a low but firm voice. "The person who takes care of him got sick at the last minute. I tried to call you early this morning, but I couldn't get through. I couldn't miss work, so I brought him. He stays quiet, he doesn't bother anyone, and I only come here to see if he's okay." "I'm not interested in your excuse," the manager cut her off. "This is inadmissible. You're fired. Get your things and get out of here now." Marina turned pale. "Please, Fabio, I need this job. It won't happen again, I promise." "It already happened, and it's over. Take the boy and go away." Roberto saw when tears began to roll down Marina's face, silent and contained. He saw when she took the hand of her son, who looked on frightened, not completely understanding what was happening. He saw when she passed through the floor, under everyone's gaze, carrying her bag and holding the boy's small hand firmly. And it was at that moment, seeing that woman being expelled not for incompetence but for trying to survive, that Roberto decided he had observed enough. It was time to act. Roberto waited exactly 30 seconds after Marina left the snack bar with her son in her arms. 30 seconds for the door to close completely, for the embarrassed silence of the room to settle, for the manager to go back to moving as if nothing serious had happened. Then he stood up. He walked with firm steps to the counter, where Fabio Mendez was talking to one of the cooks, already resuming his usual authoritarian tone. Some customers were still looking at the door Marina had exited through, clearly uncomfortable with the scene they had witnessed. But the movement of the eatery was beginning to return to normal, as if the firing of an employee were just another routine event. Roberto stopped in front of the manager. Fabio looked at him with that slightly irritated expression of someone who is too busy to be interrupted. "Yes, sir. Any problem with your order?" "Yes," Roberto replied with a calm voice but loaded with something that made Fabio furrow his brow. "Several problems, actually." Fabio sighed with impatience. "Look, if it's about what just happened, it's none of your business. Internal company matter. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm busy." Roberto took his wallet from his pocket, opened it and showed his corporate ID. The card had his full name, title and photo. "Roberto Aguirre, founder and president of Sabor Asia. The change in Fabio's expression was instantaneous. His face went from irritation to shock, then to a poorly disguised fear. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried to speak, and couldn't. Around them, the employees who were close enough to hear paralyzed. A heavy silence took over the environment. "Mr. Aguiar, I didn't know you were here. If you had let me know you were coming, I would have prepared." "Exactly," Roberto cut him off, putting his wallet away. "You would have prepared. You would have fixed everything to look perfect. But I didn't come here to see what you prepare. I came to see what really happens when you think no one is watching." Fabio tried to compose himself, but his hands were shaking slightly. "Sir, about Marina's dismissal I can explain. She violated clear company rules. She brought a child into the work environment without authorization. That is inadmissible." "Inadmissible," Roberto repeated in a tone that made Fabio step back half a pace. "Do you know what I find inadmissible, Fabio? Humiliating an employee in front of customers and colleagues, exposing a child to an embarrassing situation, firing someone without even asking what happened, without offering alternatives, without showing a minimum of compassion. But, sir, the rules. Rules exist to protect the functioning of the company and the well-being of people, not to be used as weapons. That woman was trying to solve a problem while maintaining her commitment to work, and instead of you helping, you destroyed her." Roberto looked around at the employees who were watching in silence. Some had tears in their eyes. Others seemed relieved, as if finally someone was saying what they never had the courage to speak. "You are suspended, Fabio, effective immediately. Go home, and tomorrow my Human Resources Department will contact you to discuss the next steps. But, sir, please, I've worked here for 5 years. I was just doing my job maintaining discipline." "Discipline?" Roberto felt the anger rise again. "That is not discipline, it's abuse, and it's over." Fabio opened his mouth to protest once more, but Roberto's gaze made him give up. He gathered his things in silence under everyone's gaze and left through the back door. When he was gone, Roberto turned to the team. Everyone was watching him with a mixture of fear and hope. "I want to make one thing clear," he said, raising his voice enough for everyone to hear. "No one here is going to be punished for what happened today. No one will suffer retaliation for anything that was said or done. I came here because I knew something was wrong, and now I see how right I was. So we are going to change things starting now." He pointed to one of the older employees, a woman around 40 who was watching everything closely. "What is your name?" "Renata, sir." "Renata, can you take over the temporary management of this unit until I reorganize things?" She hesitated, clearly surprised. "I can try, sir, but I don't know if... You know this place better than any external manager I could bring in right now. And I'm sure you know how to treat people with more respect than what I saw here. That is already an excellent start." Renata nodded, still processing the sudden change. Roberto spent the next 2 hours inside the snack bar, not as an owner observing, but as a manager working. He talked to each employee individually, heard complaints that had been stifled for months, and noted structural problems that had been ignored. And the more he listened, the more the complete picture formed. Fabio Mendez wasn't just a bad manager. He had systematically created a toxic environment. Work schedules were intentionally set up to harm employees he didn't like. Time-off requests were denied without reason. People who showed too much competence were sabotaged because he felt threatened. And those who complained or questioned his decisions were pressured until they resigned. The saddest part was that all of this was documented, but no one had paid attention. Human resources reports showed a very high turnover rate. Internal records revealed complaints that were filed away without investigation. Team satisfaction numbers had plummeted in the last 2 years, but since the unit was still functioning and turning a profit, no one questioned it. Roberto felt ashamed to have built systems that allowed this to happen, ashamed to have blindly trusted metrics without understanding what was behind them. But it was while reviewing the personal records that he found something that changed his perspective completely. Marina Oliveira. He asked to see her full file. What he found was revealing in a way he didn't expect. Marina had joined the company 3 years ago in a basic service position. In the first 6 months, she received 3 formal compliments from customers, all highlighting not just the service, but her ability to solve complex problems with creativity and empathy. Her supervisor at the time had recommended a promotion. But then Fabio took over the management of the unit. From then on, Marina continued to receive compliments from customers, but there was never another mention of promotion. Her internal evaluations were always positive, but generic, without specific recognition of her skills. She had requested 3 times to participate in leadership training offered by the company. All 3 requests were denied, always with vague justifications. And then Roberto found something that made him stop reading and take a deep breath. In Marina's personal file, there was an attachment that shouldn't have been there. It was a document she had created herself, probably without knowing it would be archived in the system, a digital notebook with detailed notes on the functioning of the snack bar. Roberto opened the file and began to read. Page after page of careful observations, organized by date and category, Marina documented problems that no one else seemed to notice, equipment that failed regularly and needed maintenance, patterns of customer movement at different times, suggestions for menu changes based on real feedback, ideas for improving the workflow in the kitchen, analyses of which employees worked best in which positions. They weren't complaints, they were solutions. And even more impressive, there were entire sections dedicated to helping colleagues. Marina noted when someone was going through personal difficulties, when they needed flexible hours, when they were being unfairly pressured, and she documented how she herself had discreetly intervened to help, whether by covering shifts, mediating conflicts, or redistributing tasks. That woman wasn't just working. She was managing the entire unit without a title, without recognition, without additional salary. And she did it because she genuinely cared. Roberto closed the file with his hands shaking, not from anger, but from something close to admiration mixed with indignation. For 3 years he had someone in his company with exceptional leadership potential, and that person was being wasted, ignored, and had now been fired in the cruelest way possible. He needed to find her. He called Renata and asked for Marina's address. The employee hesitated, concerned about privacy, but Roberto explained his intentions, and she relented. The address was in a simple neighborhood in the east zone of Campinas, far from the center. Roberto got in the car and drove there, with Marina's file open on the tablet next to his seat. The house was small, well kept, despite being clearly modest. A small iron gate painted white, a tiny garden with some plants, windows with light curtains. Roberto took a deep breath before ringing the bell. Marina opened the door. She was still in her eatery uniform but had already taken off the apron. Her eyes were red, but there were no more tears. When she saw who was at the door, her expression changed from surprise to caution. "Mr. Aguiar, Marina, may I come in? I need to talk to you." She hesitated, looking back, where Roberto could hear the voice of a child watching television. After a few seconds, she nodded and stepped aside to let him pass. The living room was simple but organized with care. Old furniture but clean and well-maintained. Photos on the wall showed Marina and the boy at different moments. Lucas was sitting on the floor, watching a cartoon, and barely noticed Roberto's presence. Marina didn't invite him to sit. She remained standing with her arms crossed in a defensive posture. "If you came to apologize, you can save it. I don't need pity." "I didn't come to apologize," Roberto replied sincerely. "I came to offer something better than that." She raised an eyebrow, suspicious. "What?" "Your job back, with a better position, a higher salary, and benefits that you should have received a long time ago." Marina let out a short, humorless laugh. "Are you serious, sir?" "Completely. And before you answer, I want you to know that I've already dismissed Fabio. He will no longer work at that unit, and I've spent the last few hours understanding what really happened there over the last few years. I know what you did, Marina. I know how you kept that place running despite everything." She looked away, uncomfortable with the recognition. "I was just doing my job." "No, you were doing much more than your job, and I have proof of that." Roberto showed the tablet with her notes. Marina turned pale. "I didn't know that was in the system. They were just personal notes. Personal notes that show more business vision than most of my managers have. You are not just a good employee, Marina. You are a natural leader, and I wasted that by not paying attention." She remained in silence, processing. Roberto could see the conflict in her eyes. "So, will you come back?" Marina looked at her son, then back at Roberto. When she spoke, her voice was firm, without emotion. No. The answer took Roberto by surprise. What do you mean, no? I'm not going back, Mr. Aguiar. Thank you for the offer, but no. And before he could ask why, she continued, with words that revealed experiences too difficult for her age. I've been through this before. Promises that things will get better, that I'll be recognized, that it will be different. And in the end, it's always the same thing. More work, more pressure, more impossible expectations. And when I can't handle everything, when I need to choose between work and my son, I'll be fired again, so thank you, but no. Roberto observed her in silence. There was a painful wisdom in those words, built upon disappointments he could only imagine. And he realized that winning Marina Oliveira's trust would be much harder than he thought. Roberto didn't leave Marina's house immediately. He remained there, standing in the small living room, digesting her refusal. Lucas continued watching television, oblivious to the tension between the adults. The cartoon filled the silence with high-pitched voices and children's songs. Marina kept her arms crossed in a posture that made it clear the conversation was over. But Roberto hadn't gotten where he was by giving up at the first no. "May I sit?" he asked in a different tone, less authoritative, more human. Marina hesitated, then indicated the sofa with a brief gesture. She sat in the opposite armchair, keeping her distance. Roberto settled in and stayed silent for a few seconds, organizing his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more honest. "You are right not to trust me." Marina blinked, surprised. She clearly hadn't expected that. "I built a large company," Roberto continued, "but somewhere along the way I lost control of what really matters. I got so focused on growing, expanding, hitting goals, that I forgot to pay attention to people. And because of that, people like Fabio were able to create toxic environments without me noticing. Because of that, you worked for 3 years doing a manager's job without receiving the recognition you deserved. And because of that, today you were humiliated and fired in the worst possible way. So yes, you have every right not to believe in me." Marina watched him closely, but her expression remained cautious. "But I didn't come here to make empty promises," Roberto continued. "I came to ask for a chance to prove that I'm serious. And for that, I need to understand your situation better. I need to know what you really need, not what I think you need." "What I need?" Marina let out a humorless laugh. "I need stability, Mr. Aguiar. I need a job that allows me to take care of my son without having to choose between paying the bills and being present in his life. I need a place where I won't be punished for being a mother. That is what I need, and with all due respect, no company can give me that." "Why not?" "Because companies want you to be available all the time. They want you to stay late when necessary, to work on holidays, to put work first. And I can't do that. My son comes first. Always. So it doesn't matter if you offer me a better position or a higher salary, if in the end I'll be pressured for things I can't fulfill." Roberto nodded slowly, processing. "And if I can guarantee that won't happen?" "How?" Marina asked, skeptical. "How can you guarantee something like that?" "By giving me a few days to put together a real proposal. Not just talk, not just promises. With structure, with documents, with formal guarantees. You give me a week, and I'll come back here with something concrete. If you don't like it, we end it here. But at least give me the chance to try." Marina fell silent, pensive. Roberto could see the internal war happening in her eyes, hope fighting against bad experiences, the will to believe facing the fear of being disappointed again. "1 week," she finally said, "but without commitment. I will listen to what you have to say, but I promise nothing." "Fair." Roberto stood up to leave, but before going out, he turned once more. "Marina, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but can I ask a personal question?" She nodded, suspicious. "Lucas's father. Does he help in any way?" Marina's expression hardened. "No, and before you ask, I don't want his help. Lucas and I are fine on our own." The firmness in her voice made it clear that the subject was closed. Roberto nodded, respecting the boundary. "Understood. Then I'll be back in a week, with a proposal that takes into account that you and Lucas are a complete package. If I can't create something that works for both, there's no sense in trying." He left Marina's house with more questions than answers, but also with renewed determination. That woman wasn't just a talented employee. She was someone who, against all odds, maintained dignity, responsibility, and competence in circumstances that would break many people. And Roberto was determined not to waste that strength. The next 7 days were intense. Roberto cancelled meetings, delegated tasks, and dedicated himself completely to building something he had never done before, a truly flexible work structure designed for single mothers. He talked to human resources experts, researched models of companies that had successful work-life balance programs, and studied benefits that really made a difference. He didn't want to create something generic. He wanted to create something specific to Marina's reality. He also revisited the notes she had made about the eatery. He read each observation with attention, impressed by the depth of the analysis. Marina didn't just identify problems, she understood the causes and proposed practical solutions. There was a systemic vision there, an ability to connect dots that few managers achieved. The more he read, the more Roberto was convinced that he wasn't just trying to correct an injustice. He was trying not to lose someone who could transform his company. On the 7th day, he returned to Marina's house. This time, he brought a thick folder with organized documents. Marina received him with the same cautious posture, but Roberto noticed she was different, less defensive, perhaps, or just more curious. They sat at the kitchen table. Lucas was at school, so they had privacy to talk. Roberto opened the folder and began to present his proposal, item by item. First, position and salary. I'm offering you the position of operational supervisor of the Cambui unit, a salary 3 times higher than what you earned as an attendant, plus performance bonuses. But you already expected that, so let's get to what really matters. He turned to the next page. Fixed schedule. You start at 9 in the morning and leave at 5 in the afternoon, Monday to Friday. No mandatory overtime, no weekend work. If there is a need for specific adjustments, they will always be negotiated with you at least 1 week in advance. Marina raised her eyebrows but said nothing. Roberto continued. Health insurance that covers you and Lucas fully, including dental and psychological. Meal vouchers and transport vouchers even on home office days when necessary, and now the most important part. He showed another document. A partnership with a private daycare 3 blocks from the eatery. The company will pay Lucas's tuition in full. You can drop him off there in the morning, work peacefully, and pick him up at the end of the shift. If he gets sick, you can be absent without a deduction. If you need to go to a school meeting or his medical appointment, you can adjust your schedule. Everything documented, everything official, everything guaranteed in the contract. Marina took the papers with trembling hands and began to read. Roberto watched her in silence, seeing when her eyes filled with tears that she tried to hide by blinking rapidly. Is this real? She asked with a choked voice. It's not just talk? It's real. All these documents have already been approved by legal and finance. If you accept, you sign today and start on Monday. There's no catch, no fine print. It's exactly what is written there. Marina continued reading, page after page. She stopped at a specific section, frowned, and reread. Family protection clause, what is this? Roberto leaned in to see what she was pointing at. That was my lawyer's idea. Basically, it guarantees that you cannot be professionally penalized for issues related to motherhood. If you need to be absent because of Lucas, whether it's illness, school, or any family emergency, it cannot be used against you in performance evaluations or promotion decisions. It's a legal protection, not just an internal policy. Marina closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was something different in her expression. It wasn't just surprise or relief. It was something deeper, as if a part of her that had been held back for a long time could finally breathe. Why are you doing this? She asked sincerely. Why so much effort for me? Because I spent the whole week reading your notes about the eatery, Roberto replied. And I realized that you see the business the same way I did when I started, not as a place to make money, but as a place that can make a difference in people's lives. Employees, customers, suppliers. You understand that a business is made of people, not processes. And that kind of vision is rare. I would be an idiot to let you escape. Marina remained silent for a long moment. Then, with a firm voice, she said something Roberto didn't expect. I have conditions. Roberto smiled. I imagined so. Go ahead. First condition. I won't pretend everything is fine when it's not. If I see something wrong, I will speak up, even if it's hard to hear, even if it's about you. Accepted. Second condition. I need autonomy to make changes. I won't ask permission for every small decision. If you are giving me this position, you need to trust that I know what I'm doing. Also accepted, but with one caveat. I want weekly reports on the changes you are implementing, not to control but to learn. You have 3 years of experience in that unit that I don't have. I want to understand your process. Marina nodded. Fair. Third condition. Lucas can come with me in emergencies. I won't make it a common practice, but if something happens and I have no other option, he comes with me. And no one will humiliate me for that again. Her voice trembled slightly on the last sentence, and Roberto felt the weight of the recent trauma. Accepted, he said firmly. And more than that, I'm going to include in the management manual for the entire chain that family situations must be treated with empathy and collaborative solutions, not with punishment. What Fabio did to you will never happen again in any of my units. Marina looked at the documents in front of her, then at Roberto, then back at the papers. Roberto could see the internal struggle happening, the fear of believing fighting against the hope that this could be real. Finally, she extended her hand. All right, I accept. Roberto shook her hand, feeling the firm and decisive grip. You won't regret it, Marina. She looked him in the eyes with an intensity that surprised him. I hope you won't either. At that moment, Roberto knew he had crossed a line. He wasn't just hiring an employee, he was starting a partnership that, in some way he didn't yet fully understand, would change his company in ways that strategic planning never could. Marina withdrew her hand and picked up a pen that was on the table. Where do I sign? Roberto showed the marked pages. While she signed each document, he watched. There was determination in every movement, but also vulnerability. Marina was betting on him, trusting against her best intuition, choosing to believe even when experience told her to be suspicious. And Roberto made a silent promise that he would not disappoint that trust. When she finished signing, Marina organized the documents and pushed them back to Roberto. Monday, 9 in the morning, she said. I'll be there. I'll be waiting. Roberto put the papers in the folder and stood up to leave. At the door, he turned once more. Marina, just one more thing. Those notes of yours about the eatery, do you still have them? I do, she replied, confused. Why? Bring them on Monday. We're going to need them. Marina nodded, still not fully understanding. But Roberto already knew what he was going to do. He wasn't just going to give Marina a better position. He was going to give her the opportunity to turn into reality all those ideas she had been keeping for 3 years. And when he left her house for the second time, Roberto was different. He was no longer just a businessman trying to correct a mistake. He was someone about to discover that the best transformations come from where we least expect them. Marina arrived at the snack bar on Monday at 8:45 in the morning, 15 minutes earlier than agreed. Lucas was safe in the daycare 3 blocks away, a place she had visited over the weekend and approved after talking at length with the educators. Seeing her son excited about his new classmates had relieved part of the tension she felt. But now, standing in front of the eatery, that tension returned with full force. It was the same door through which she had left days ago, carrying Lucas and the tears of humiliation. Returning felt like a triumph and an exposure at the same time. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The eatery hadn't opened to the public yet. Some employees were already there preparing the environment for the day. When they saw her enter, the conversation stopped. Everyone looked at her with varied expressions, surprise, curiosity, some with relief, others with something that looked like suspicion. Renata was the first to approach. The older woman, who had been managing temporarily, had a genuine smile on her face. Marina, so good to see you back. Mr. Aguiar let me know you'd be back today, but he didn't tell me the details. Marina flashed a polite smile, still processing the strange feeling of being there again. I'm taking over as operational supervisor. I hope we can work well together. Renata's expression remained friendly, but Marina noticed a slight surprise. Supervisor? Wow, that's great, you deserve it. But not everyone reacted the same way. Across the room, Marina saw 2 employees whispering and looking in her direction. She recognized one of them, Juliano, who was always close to Fabio. His expression made it clear he wasn't happy with the change. Marina decided to ignore it. She had work to do. Roberto arrived punctually at 9, accompanied by a woman he introduced as Patricia from Human Resources. She brought more documents, a new badge for Marina, and information about training. "We're going to have a quick meeting with the whole team," Roberto announced. "I want to officially introduce Marina and explain the changes that are going to happen here." The employees gathered in the dining area, forming a semicircle. There were 12 people in total with varying ages and experiences. Some looked hopeful, others skeptical. Roberto went straight to the point. "As you all know, there have been changes in the management of this unit. Fabio is no longer part of the team, and starting today, Marina Oliveira takes over as operational supervisor. She will have the authority to implement changes, reorganize processes, and make decisions that improve both the functioning of this eatery and your quality of life." There were murmurs. Marina kept her posture upright, but she felt the weight of all the gazes. "I know some of you may be wondering why this choice," Roberto continued. "The answer is simple. Marina worked here for 3 years and proved day after day that she understands this place better than anyone. She was already doing the management work without the title, and now she will have the tools and recognition to do it officially. I expect everyone to give her the respect and collaboration she deserves." Roberto looked at Marina, indicating it was her turn to speak. Marina stepped forward, her heart racing. She had never spoken to a group like that, as a leader, as the person in charge. "Hi, everyone. Most people here know me, so I won't pretend this isn't strange for all of us. I was on the other side until last week, but I want to make it clear from the start that I'm not here to be the new version of Fabio. I'm not going to yell, I'm not going to humiliate anyone, and I'm not going to pretend I know everything. I'm going to learn along with you, but I'm also going to demand quality work, mutual respect, and commitment. If anyone has a problem with me, you can speak directly. I'd rather hear the truth than find out behind my back." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I know some people here have been through difficult things in recent months. I know some of you don't trust promises that things will get better anymore. I understand that, so I'm not going to promise. I'm going to do. And if you notice it's not working, call me out. We're in this together." There was a silence, then some nods. Renata started a hesitant applause that a few others joined, but Giuliano and 2 other employees kept their arms crossed with closed expressions. Roberto noticed the division but didn't comment. He said his goodbyes and left, leaving Marina to officially start her first day. The first few hours were strange. Marina divided her time between observing, learning functions she didn't know, and dealing with the strange dynamic of being both new to the position and old to the place. Some employees treated her normally, others with an exaggerated deference that seemed more like fear than respect. It was in the middle of the morning that the first real test happened. Giuliano approached her with a shift schedule spreadsheet that Fabio used to make. "Marina, you need to approve next week's schedule. It's ready. You just need to sign." Marina took the spreadsheet and began to read. It took less than a minute to notice the problems. The distribution was completely unbalanced. Some employees had 6 consecutive days of work, others only 3. The hardest shifts were concentrated on the same people, and there was a clear pattern of favoritism. "This isn't right," she said, handing back the spreadsheet. "It needs to be redone." Giuliano frowned. "But this is how it's always been done. Fabio approved it this way. And look where Fabio is now." Marina kept her voice firm but not aggressive. "This isn't fair to the team. I'm going to redo the schedule, ensuring a balanced distribution. It will be ready by the end of the day." Giuliano opened his mouth to protest, but something in Marina's expression made him give up. He took the spreadsheet back and walked away, clearly dissatisfied. Renata, who had observed the exchange, approached Marina with a discreet smile. "He was testing you. He wanted to see if you would simply accept what was already ready." "I know," Marina replied, "and there will be more tests, but I won't give in on things I know are wrong." "Good luck, you're going to need it." Marina spent the rest of the morning immersed in spreadsheets, reports, and systems she was still learning to use. She discovered quickly that the supervisor position involved much more administrative work than she expected. It wasn't just leading people, but managing inventory, approving orders, analyzing costs, and solving bureaucratic problems. Sometimes she caught herself wondering if she had made the right choice. This was much harder than it seemed. It was during the lunch rush, when the movement became intense that Marina had her first opportunity to really make a difference. The kitchen was overloaded. 2 employees had missed work without notice, and those present could barely handle the orders. The line of customers was growing, the atmosphere was getting tense, and Marina could see the frustration increasing. Instead of just observing and demanding, she did something different. She took off the blazer she had put on to mark her new position, grabbed an apron, and entered the kitchen. "What needs to be done now?" she asked the head cook, a man in his 50s named Antonio. He looked at her, surprised. "You don't need to do this, Marina. You're a supervisor now. And exactly for that reason, I'm going to help. We'll solve the rush, then I'll take care of the administrative part. Tell me, what do I do?" Antonio hesitated, then pointed to a station. "If you can assemble the cold sandwiches while we handle the grills, it helps a lot." Marina began to work. Her hands moved with the same efficiency as always, assembling sandwiches, organizing orders, cleaning as she worked. In 15 minutes, the kitchen's pace improved. In half an hour, the line returned to normal. When they could finally breathe, Antonio looked at her with a respect that wasn't there before. "Thank you. I don't know how many supervisors would do that." Marina shrugged, washing her hands. "We're a team. If someone is sinking, everyone sinks together." The news of what she had done spread quickly among the employees. Marina noticed that some began to look at her differently, not with fear or suspicion, but with something close to admiration. At the end of the afternoon, when she finally managed to sit down to finish the shift schedule, Marina realized something important. She didn't need to prove she was an authoritarian boss. She needed to prove she was someone they could trust. And that meant being present, working together, admitting when she didn't know something and learning in practice. In the following days, Marina implemented small changes. Nothing revolutionary, just adjustments that made sense based on her 3 years of experience observing the functioning of the place. She reorganized the inventory to facilitate access to the most used items. She created a simple communication system between the kitchen and the floor that reduced errors in orders. She adjusted break times to ensure there was always adequate coverage. Small things that added up made a real difference in the day-to-day. But not everything was easy. Giuliano continued to resist, questioning every decision, trying to undermine her authority in subtle ways. Other employees sometimes tested her limits, arriving late or leaving tasks half-finished just to see how she would react. Marina learned to be firm without being cruel. She called attention when necessary, but always in private, never exposing anyone. She explained her decisions instead of just imposing them, and most importantly, she maintained the same stance for everyone, without favorites. A week after taking over, she had her first moment of true crisis. It was a Thursday, a heavy movement day. Marina was in the office when she received a call from the daycare. Lucas had fallen on the playground and hit his head. It wasn't anything serious, but they needed her to pick him up to take him to the doctor as a precaution. The immediate panic was followed by that familiar feeling of being pulled in opposite directions. The work needed her. Her son needed her, and there was no way to be in 2 places at the same time. That was when Renata entered the office and noticed her expression. "What happened?" Marina explained quickly, already grabbing her bag. "Go," Renata said without hesitation. "We'll cover here. Lucas comes first." "But—" "No buts. This is exactly why you have this position. So you can be a mother without having to choose. Go get your son." Marina ran out with teary eyes. Not from sadness, but from relief for finally being in a place where her priorities were respected. A few hours later, when she returned with Lucas safe and sound with only a small bump on his forehead, she found the eatery functioning normally. Renata and the others had covered everything, without drama, without complaints. And it was at that moment that Marina realized something fundamental. She wasn't just building a new management. She was building a real team where people supported each other. But there was still a long way to go. 3 months had passed since Marina took over as supervisor, and the Cambui snack bar was a different place. The changes didn't happen overnight. They were built brick by brick, decision by decision, conversation by conversation. But the results were undeniable. Employee turnover, which was previously very high, had practically dropped to 0. Customer reviews on social media improved consistently. The work environment, which was previously loaded with tension, now breathed more lightly. Marina had implemented a system of weekly meetings where everyone could speak openly about problems and suggestions. At first, people barely opened their mouths, accustomed to the previous culture where complaints were punished, but gradually they began to trust. And when they saw that their ideas were heard and implemented when they made sense, they began to feel like owners of that space too. Giuliano, who had resisted so much at the beginning, ended up resigning in the second month, not because of pressure from Marina, but because he realized his old way of working no longer fit there. She didn't try to convince him to stay. Some people simply don't adapt to cultures based on respect when they are used to authoritarian environments. In his place, Marina promoted Carla, a young employee who had always shown initiative but had never had the opportunity to grow. The girl flourished in the new position, bringing fresh ideas and an energy that was contagious to others. Roberto visited the unit at least once a week, always observing, always asking questions, always learning. He had become more than just the owner of the company to Marina. He was almost a mentor, someone who challenged her to think bigger, to trust herself more. But on that Tuesday in October, 3 months after taking the position, Marina was exhausted. It wasn't just physical tiredness, it was something deeper, a feeling of being pulled in all directions at the same time, of never being enough, of carrying a weight that sometimes seemed too large. Lucas was in the adaptation phase at school, which meant morning tantrums and poorly slept nights. The eatery was doing well, but that meant more responsibilities, more decisions, more people depending on her. And Marina was starting to feel the emotional cost of keeping everything running. That morning, after a particularly difficult night where Lucas woke up 3 times crying, Marina made her first serious mistake in the new position. She approved a purchase of ingredients without properly checking the prices. The supplier, noticing the mistake, charged prices far above the market. When Antonio, the head cook, pointed out the problem, Marina felt the ground disappear. "How much more did we pay?" "Almost double the normal amount, Marina. This is going to impact the budget for the whole month." Marina felt panic rising. It wasn't just a matter of money. It was the first time she had failed so concretely, so measurably. And worse, she had failed in exactly the kind of attention to detail that had always set her apart. "I'll solve this," she said, trying to keep her voice firm. "I'll contact the supplier and negotiate." But when she called, the supplier was inflexible. The order had already been processed. The delivery was on its way. There was no going back. Marina hung up the phone with her hands shaking. She went to the bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and for the first time since taking the position, let the tears fall. What was she doing? Who did she think she was to think she could manage an operation of that size? She was just a waitress who got good at solving small problems. But that didn't qualify her for important financial decisions, for leading an entire team, for being responsible for the success or failure of a business. Maybe Giuliano was right. Maybe her promotion had been favoritism, not merit. Maybe Roberto had made a mistake in trusting her. Marina stayed there for 10 minutes, trying to recompose herself. When she finally came out, she found Renata waiting outside with a worried expression. "Are you okay?" Marina wanted to say yes, to maintain the facade of competence, but she was too tired to pretend. "No, I just cost the company a significant amount of money that shouldn't have been spent. And I don't know if I can do this, Renata. I don't know if I'm good enough for this position." Renata held Marina's arm firmly, making her look into her eyes. "Everyone makes mistakes, Marina. Everyone. The difference is that you are learning in a position you've never had before, with responsibilities you've never had before. Of course you're going to make mistakes sometimes, but do you know how many things you've gotten right in the last 3 months? Do you know how many lives you've changed here, including mine?" Marina shook her head, tears threatening to return. "When you took over," Renata continued, "I was 2 months away from resigning. I couldn't stand working in this place anymore. I was getting sick from so much stress. But you changed everything. You changed how we work, how we treat each other, how we feel coming to work every day. So you made a mistake on a purchase? It happens, but that doesn't erase all the good you've done." Renata's words helped, but Marina still felt the weight of failure. She went home that night carrying a sense of defeat she couldn't shake. Lucas noticed that his mother was different. At dinner, He held her hand and asked in his little 5-year-old voice, "Is Mommy sad?" Marina forced a smile. "Just a little tired, sweetie, but it will pass." After putting Lucas to sleep, Marina went to her room and opened the drawer where she kept her most important belongings. At the bottom, she found an old notebook with a worn cover and yellowed pages. They were her notes, the same ones Roberto had found in the company's system. Marina hadn't opened that notebook in months. Since taking over the position, she had been so focused on learning the new functions that she had completely forgotten about those old records. She sat on the bed and began to flip through. Page after page of observations she had made over 3 years as a waitress. Problems identified, solutions proposed, ideas for improvements, everything written with the same careful handwriting, organized by date and category. And it was while reading those old notes that Marina had a revelation. She wasn't starting from scratch. She wasn't learning to be a leader now. She had already been doing it for 3 years, just without the official title. Every problem she had documented there was a situation she had resolved in practice. Every proposed solution was something she had already tested informally. Every improvement idea came from real observation, from understanding how things worked in the day-to-day. Marina wasn't a waitress who became a supervisor. She was a leader who finally received the tools to do what she had always done, only now, officially. And that mistake she made today, that poorly made purchase, didn't disqualify her. It was just part of the process of learning new aspects of a job she already mastered in its essence. She picked up a pen and opened the notebook to a blank page. She began to write as she used to do. Today's date, situation, approved purchase without checking prices properly. Result, significant additional cost. Lesson, create a double-check system for purchases above a certain value. Never assume a supplier is being fair just because they always have been. Healthy suspicion is part of financial management. She continued writing, documenting not just the mistake but the whole context, the emotions, the learning. And in doing so, she felt something familiar return. That feeling of being in control, not because she knew everything, but because she was willing to learn from everything. The next morning, Marina arrived at the eatery with renewed determination. She gathered the team and did something no previous leader had done in that place. She publicly admitted her mistake. "Everyone, I need to talk about something that happened yesterday. I made a significant mistake by approving a purchase without checking properly. This is going to impact our budget this month. It is my responsibility, and I'm going to work to minimize the impact and ensure it doesn't happen again." There was a surprised silence. People weren't used to leaders who admitted mistakes. "But I want to use this as an opportunity to improve our processes," Marina continued. "I'm going to create a double-check system for important purchases, and if anyone notices something that seems wrong, even if I have approved it, I want you to question me. I'd rather be corrected than continue making mistakes." Antonio was the first to speak. "It happens, Marina. What's important is to learn, and from what you're saying, you've already learned." The others agreed, and Marina felt something change inside her. She didn't need to be perfect. She needed to be honest, responsible, and willing to grow. In the following weeks, Marina implemented not just the new purchasing system, but also resumed the practice of making detailed notes about everything that happened in the eatery. She shared these observations with the team in weekly meetings, transforming her learning process into something collective. And something interesting began to happen. Other employees started making their own notes, bringing ideas, and getting actively involved in the continuous improvement of the place. Carla suggested changes to the table layout that improved customer flow. Antonio proposed adjustments to the menu based on real feedback. Renata created a mentoring system where more experienced employees helped new ones adapt. The eatery was no longer just a place where people worked. It was a space where they grew together. Roberto noticed the changes. On one of his weekly visits, he called Marina for a private talk. "I want to propose something to you," he said. "I have other units going through problems similar to the ones you found here, not as serious as Fabio, but weak leadership, unmotivated environments, potential being wasted. And I was thinking, what if you could apply what you learned here in other places?" Marina looked at him, processing. "What exactly are you proposing?" I want you to take on a broader role, not as a regional manager, nothing that formal yet, but as an internal consultant. You would visit other units, identify problems, propose solutions, and help other managers develop healthier work cultures. Without abandoning this unit completely but expanding your reach, Verena felt her heart race. It was scary, but it was also exactly the kind of challenge that 3 months ago she would have refused out of fear. Now, after everything she had lived through, after all the mistakes and successes, after proving to herself that she was capable of growing and learning, the answer was different. I accept, but on one condition. What is it? I want to take Renata and Carla with me on these visits. They were fundamental to what we built here, and if we're going to spread this culture to other units, it makes sense for it to be a collective effort, not an individual one. Roberto smiled. That is exactly the kind of thinking that made me certain you were the right person. And at that moment, Marina realized something that changed everything. She wasn't just building a career, she was building a legacy, not of individual greatness, but of collective transformation. What had started as a desperate attempt to keep a job while taking care of her son had become something much larger, a mission to ensure other people didn't go through what she went through, that other parents didn't have to choose between livelihood and family, that other workers weren't humiliated by insecure leaders. And all of this had started with a notebook that no one was supposed to see, but which revealed what she had always been, a leader who only needed the right opportunity to flourish. 6 months after taking on the role of internal consultant, Marina was standing in the auditorium of the Sabor Asia headquarters before all the managers and supervisors of the chain. 42 people who led the units spread across the interior of São Paulo. Some knew her. Most had only heard of her. Roberto was at her side, but he had made it clear that this moment was hers. Verena took a deep breath, looking at the people in front of her. A year ago, the idea of speaking to an audience of that size would have paralyzed her with fear. But now, after everything she had lived through, after all the battles fought and won, she felt something different. Not absolute confidence, but something more valuable, the certainty that she had something important to say. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marina Oliveira, and a year ago I was a waitress at the Cambuí unit. Today I am here to tell a story, not about how I became a supervisor, but about how an entire business can change when it decides to see the people who really make it work. She started from the beginning. She told about the 3 years working under Fabio's management, about the toxic environment, about the small daily cruelties that undermined people's dignity, not as a victim, but as a witness to a system that needed to change. Then she told about that fateful day, about taking Lucas to work because she had no alternative, about the public humiliation, the firing, the pain of leaving, carrying her son under everyone's gaze. She saw when some managers in the audience shifted, uncomfortable. Good. They should feel uncomfortable. But the story doesn't end there, Marina continued. It ends with a businessman who decided to do something that few do. See beyond the numbers, and it ends with a risky bet that talent and leadership can be in the most unlikely places. She spoke about Roberto's proposal, about her initial refusal, about the conditions she imposed and that were accepted. She spoke about returning to the snack bar as a supervisor, about the challenges, the mistakes, the small victories. And then she got to the part that really mattered. In the last 6 months, I visited 15 of our units. In each one I found variations of the same pattern, not as extreme as what I lived, but present. Leadership that manages through fear instead of respect. Brilliant employees being wasted in positions that don't tap into their potential. Cultures where the important thing is to obey, not to think. Marina paused, letting the words sink in. And in each of these units we made changes, not big revolutions, small adjustments that added up transform everything. Listening to the people who actually do the work, creating safe spaces so they can tell the truth, recognizing that personal problems don't disappear just because someone is on shift, understanding that a happy employee is not a luxury, it's a strategy. She showed slides with data. Units where they implemented changes saw turnover drop by an average of 60%. Customer satisfaction rose by 40%. Productivity increased without increasing hours worked. And most importantly, Employees began proposing ideas, getting involved, feeling like owners of that space. Numbers are important, Marina said, but there's something that numbers don't capture: the difference between working because you have to and working because you want to, between obeying orders and contributing with ideas, between surviving and thriving. She told specific stories about Daniela, an employee from a unit in Jundiaí who was about to resign, and who, after the changes, not only stayed but proposed a new service system that was adopted across the entire chain. About Pedro, a manager from Piracicaba, who thought he was going to be fired when Marina arrived and who today is one of the most respected leaders in the company. About Renata and Carla, who accompanied her on the visits and were becoming exceptional leaders in their own right. And then Marina arrived at the moment she had carefully planned. I know some of you must be thinking, this is beautiful in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. Or my unit is different, my employees don't care like that. Or even, this is something for people who don't understand real business. She saw some heads nod slightly. Good. At least they were honest. So I'm going to make a proposal. Choose 3 of you from the units with the worst results. Let me and my team work with you for 3 months. If you don't see real, measurable improvement, you can discard everything I've said here as beautiful but impractical theory. But if you see real change, I want you to commit to applying the same in your units and helping other managers do the same. There were murmurs. Marina waited. It was a man around 40, a manager of a unit in Sorocaba, who raised his hand first. I accept. My unit has been in the red for 6 months. If you can turn that around, I'll do whatever you ask. 2 others volunteered. Marina noted the names and nodded. Then let's start next week. The presentation ended with polite applause. It wasn't an ovation, but Marina didn't expect that. Real change doesn't happen with inspiring speeches. It happens with consistent work, 1 day at a time. But it was while coming down from the stage that something unexpected happened. A young woman, she couldn't have been more than 25, approached with teary eyes. Her badge said Sara, assistant manager of a unit in Limeira. Thank you, she said with a choked voice. Thank you for talking about Lucas, about being a mother, about not having to choose. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and every day I feel guilty. Guilty when I'm working because I'm not with her. Guilty when I'm with her because I think I should be working more. And hearing you say that it's possible to do both, that it's possible to be a good mother and a good professional, that changed something in me. Marina held the girl's hands, feeling the tremor in them. It's not easy, she said honestly. It's never going to be easy. But there is a way to make it possible, and you don't have to do it alone. That's the difference. Other people approached, some to question details of the implemented changes, others to share their own stories of difficulty. And Marina realized that her journey had touched something deep in many people. Months passed. Marina and her team worked intensely with the 3 volunteer units. It was difficult. There was resistance, mistakes, moments of wanting to give up. But gradually, just as had happened in Cambuí, things began to change. The Sorocaba unit came out of the red for the first time in a year. The Americana unit saw 3 employees who were about to leave not only stay, but take on leadership positions. The Ribeirão Preto unit implemented a mentoring program that became a reference, and as the results appeared, other managers began to seek out Marina. Not because they were ordered to, but because they saw it worked. A year after that presentation, Marina was again at the company headquarters, but this time not as a temporary consultant. Roberto had created a new position specifically for her, Director of Organizational Culture. The title was pompous, but the work was the same she had always done. Seeing people, hearing stories, creating spaces where everyone could be whole, not just the edited version of themselves that work required. It was on a quiet Friday afternoon that Roberto called her for a talk. They sat not in his formal office, but in a small snack bar he maintained near the headquarters, one of the first he had opened 30 years ago. I want to show you something, he said, opening his laptop. On the screen, a graph showed the evolution of the company over the last year. Profit had increased, yes, but the most impressive were other numbers. Turnover at a historic low. Employee satisfaction at a record high. The number of people promoted internally 3 times higher than the previous year. This is you, Roberto said. Not alone, of course, but it was your vision, your ideas, your courage to speak the truth that started all of this. Marina looked at the numbers, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking of Lucas, who was now in his first year of school and happy, thinking of Renata, who had become a regional manager, thinking of Carla, who was studying business administration sponsored by the company, thinking of all the people who had been seen, heard and valued. Do you know what still impresses me?" Roberto said, closing the laptop. "That day I found you being fired, I saw injustice, but you saw opportunity. Even in humiliation, even in pain, you didn't lose the ability to see possibilities. That is rare." Marina shook her head. "It wasn't opportunity I saw, it was necessity. The necessity that this should never happen again, not to me, not to anyone." "And that is exactly why it works," Roberto replied. "You don't do this for recognition or promotion. You do it because you genuinely care, and people feel that." They stayed in silence for a moment, sharing a simple coffee in a simple snack bar that represented the beginning of everything. "And Lucas?" Roberto asked. "How is he with all of this?" Marina smiled, the first genuinely light smile in a long time. "Happy. He has friends at school, loves his teacher, is learning to read. And do you know the most important part? He sees me happy. He sees that it's possible to work without being miserable, that it's possible to have a purpose without giving up who we love. I think that is the greatest inheritance I can leave for him." Roberto nodded, moved in a way he rarely demonstrated. "You changed my company, Marina. But more than that, you changed the way I see business. I built all of this focusing on processes, systems, efficiency, and I was partly right. But I forgot that at the center of everything are people. People with stories, with difficulties, with dreams. You reminded me of that." Marina felt her eyes sting. A year ago, she was someone the company had discarded without a second thought. Now she was someone who was transforming that same company from the inside out. The journey didn't end there. There were still units to improve, cultures to transform, people to reach. But for the first time in her life, Marina felt she was exactly where she should be, doing exactly what she was born to do. Not because someone had given her permission, but because she herself had discovered through pain and struggle who she really was. Weeks later, Marina was organizing papers in her office when she found that old notebook, the same one that had brought her there. She flipped through the pages with affection, reading observations she had made years ago when she was just a waitress with ideas no one listened to. She picked up a pen and opened to a blank page at the end. She wrote one last note, not as a record of a problem or solution, but as a reflection. "A year ago I was fired for trying to be a mother and a worker at the same time. Today, I help create environments where other people don't have to make that impossible choice. I discovered that the greatest strength isn't in never falling, but in deciding to get up even when everything says to stay on the ground. And I learned that transforming a system doesn't require special powers. It requires the courage to speak the truth, the patience to build brick by brick, and the faith that people, when truly seen, are capable of extraordinary things." She closed the notebook and put it away again. She no longer needed it as a guide. Now it was a memory, proof that where she was no accident, but the result of years of planting seeds that no one saw. And as she went back to work, preparing the next visit to a unit that needed help, Marina knew that her story wasn't about a spectacular rise or dramatic redemption. It was about something simpler and deeper, about choosing every day to be whole, to be a mother and a professional, to be strong and vulnerable, to be a leader and a learner, and about proving that the best leaders aren't those who never fall. They are those who, upon falling, learn to lift others up with them. Dear listeners, we hope that Marina and Roberto's story has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, courage, and new beginnings, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it Marina's humiliation, her courageous refusal, the moment she discovered her old notes, or the final transformation? Every day, we bring intense and inspiring stories like this one, which reveal the deepest and truest side of the human